Hello. Is schizophrenia a brain disease? Is schizophrenia a brain disease? The quick answer is there is no proof that schizophrenia is a brain disease. It might seem like a brain disease, you might think it's a brain disease, but really there is no proof that schizophrenia is a brain disease. It could be a complex set of psychosocial processes that are motivating individuals to speak and behave in ways that we interpret as psychotic, or as hallucinating or delusional, or perhaps people are speaking in metaphors or idioms that are inappropriate or misunderstood, but there is no proof that schizophrenia is a brain disease. And I think I just stated that quite succinctly. If anyone tells you that schizophrenia is definitely a brain disease, if they say that it is a definitive that it is definitively a brain disease, then they are lying to you. You're being lied to. It's psychiatric lies and psychiatric propaganda. Thomas Szasz used the following analogy in one of his books. Catholics, the religion, Catholicism, a branch of Christianity, has the doctrine of transubstantiation. Transubstantiation is the idea that the Eucharist, which is the bread and wine they use for the sacrament of communion, the Catholic doctrine of transubstantiation states that when a priest blesses the bread and wine, that bread and wine literally becomes the body and blood of Christ. That is the Catholic doctrine of transubstantiation. In one of his books, I can't remember exactly which one, I believe Thomas Szasz, psychiatrist Thomas Szasz, he compares what psychiatrists do with schizophrenia to the Catholic doctrine of transubstantiation, in the sense that psychiatrists are literalizing the metaphor. They're saying schizophrenia is literally a brain disease, like Catholics are saying that the bread and wine are literally the body and blood of Christ. Anybody who is not Catholic can clearly see that the bread and blood, that the bread and wine are not literally the body and blood of Christ. That is plain to see. So Catholics are literalizing a metaphor, just like psychiatrists are literalizing the metaphor of schizophrenia being a real brain disease. If schizophrenia is a real brain disease, that is, if there are objective ways, objective, not subjective, if there are objective ways of diagnosing schizophrenia using pathophysiological or histopathological means, some sort of objective test, some sort of objective medical test to diagnose schizophrenia that does not rely on the subjective judgment of a clinician, if that happens, then schizophrenia may be a real, genuine neurological disorder. But until that happens, it's a set of criteria that people use subjective judgments to diagnose. So again, if schizophrenia had objective medical tests, objective, not subjective, objective medical tests that could be used to diagnose schizophrenia, and if there were objective cures for schizophrenia using authentic medical means that produced an objective cure to those lesions, those physiological bodily lesions, then schizophrenia could be a real medical disorder. But again, homosexuality was once declared a mental illness. It doesn't mean homosexuality was an actual real bodily illness. I would encourage you to read books by Thomas Szasz, like Schizophrenia, the Sacred Symbol of Psychiatry, or Psychiatry, the Science of Lies. Szasz wrote about 35 books. You should check them out. But yeah, there is no objective proof that schizophrenia is a brain disorder. That's a fact. There is no objective proof. If anybody tells you that there is, they're lying to you. They are lying to you. I could say more about this. Yeah, I mentioned transubstantiation, the Catholic doctrine. Oh yes, a perfect example of this, exactly what I'm talking about, is neurosyphilis. So syphilis is a sexually transmitted disease. It affects the brain, I believe it's a bacteria, and left untreated it will cause what seems like madness. So if you actually study the history of neurosyphilis, before we knew what it was, before humanity knew what syphilis was and what it did, how to cure it, and so on and so forth, people would get syphilis, their face would sort of rot off, and their brain would be destroyed, and they would appear to go mad. So that's neurosyphilis. And eventually, we were able to figure out objective ways of diagnosing syphilis. There are objective medical tests to diagnose syphilis and neurosyphilis. We don't rely on questions and answers and subjective judgments to diagnose syphilis. There are objective tests to diagnose syphilis, and there are objective cures to cure syphilis. After a person is cured of syphilis, you can do the objective medical tests again, and they will come up negative for syphilis. So if schizophrenia is a real brain disorder, in theory, we should be able to have objective tests that objectively diagnose it, and then have objective cures that objectively cure it, and then we can test to see if somebody still has schizophrenia. But that is not what happens now. It is based on question and answers and subjective judgments. And again, there is no proof that schizophrenia is a real biological medical disorder. It's subjectively diagnosed. And ultimately, sanity and insanity is somewhat subjective. So I'll leave you all that. I'll leave you to think about that. One more thing I'll say, I'll touch upon. I believe it is in Thomas Szasz's book, Psychiatry, The Science of Lies. Szasz compares psychiatry to art forgery. So real doctors diagnose real diseases, they have real cures, and they really help people. Psychiatrists diagnose metaphorical diseases, and they give drugs that are arguably not actually medicines. They are drugs that can affect emotions and behaviors, but are they actually fixing anything beyond the patient's immediate subjective distress? That's a whole other story. But back to my point, in the book Psychiatry, The Science of Lies, Szasz compares psychiatrists diagnosing mental illness to art forgers, in the sense that, if you have an authentic Picasso painting, if you have a real Picasso painting, if you also have a forgery of that painting, it doesn't matter how good the forgery is, it's still not a real Picasso painting, because only Picasso painted real paintings. And Szasz uses this metaphor in the sense of real medical disorders are objectively diagnosed and objectively cured, potentially, and that is real medicine. Psychiatry is fake medicine. Psychiatrists are metaphorical doctors treating metaphorical diseases. And no matter how much it appears to be real medicine, it's still not real medicine. Just like only Picasso painted real Picassos, only real doctors doing objective medicine, treating objective bodily diseases, those are real doctors doing actual healing. Psychiatrists are dealing with problems in living, but they medicalize them, and it ultimately harms society. So I would encourage you to read books by psychiatrist Thomas Szasz. I have a book, Outlaw Psychiatric Slavery by Michael Ten. It's on Amazon. I'm on Patreon. I'm going to end it there. But again, my whole point of this, and it's still true, there is no proof that schizophrenia is an objective medical disorder. And if there is proof, then it will be a neurological disorder and not a psychiatric disorder. Just like neurosyphilis. Just like with neurosyphilis. Look up the history of that. Read about it. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please subscribe, watch my other videos, visit my websites, read my books, support me on Patreon, and have a wonderful morning, evening, afternoon, or night, whenever and wherever you may be. Cheers.